Just before we jump into this message too, I do want to just share with you just a little bit of an update. Many of you know, but we're learning that not everybody knows. A couple weeks ago, I announced and shared with you, just shared with Journey as a whole, that Erica and I and our time at Journey is coming to a close after what will be 18 years of traveling this road together. We've just really sensed God's release from this and him pulling us into some new dreams, which is really what got us here 18 years ago, was God kind of pulling us with new dreams out of a remarkable and incredible life-giving environment we were in. And so it's a little bit like that again. It's not exactly like that. We're not headed to another church. We're not launching another church or anything like that. We're just kind of sensing some unique and different callings. And so we are coming to the end of our time here. We'll be here through sometime in May. But I want to just give you a little update, because as we share that, this is a process, it's new to us, but Journey's never been through this process before. And so where are we really and what's really happening? Well, for the last 2 weeks or so, the Journey's advisory team has really just been a time of prayer and listening. They've been a time of prayer and listening and discerning who God might be prompting and building as a search team here at Journey, a team of people who would lead the process in searching for whoever the next pastor of Journey might be. After 2 weeks, really, of just praying and listening, the advisory team pulled back together early this past week, and they brought their collective discernment to the table and to a discussion, and then kind of began to collectively navigate, okay, what is the Lord saying to us? And established a list of names they just felt like the Lord had really prompted in them over the last couple of weeks, and kind of established a list of, hey, this is who we think God is inviting on to this search team. That led to, right away after that, the people on that list beginning to get calls to say, hey, would you consider this? And with a little explanation of search team and all of that dynamic. Then there was a window of time for those people to just be prayerful and listen a little bit, just to say, God, what is my part here? Do I have a part in this? What's my role in this? Do I have a part on this team? As the week has moved on, that team is almost fully solidified, with people calling back with yeses, and in many ways just confirming what the Lord had already been stirring in the advisory team about these people. And so it's been remarkable. And now very quickly, that search team will be part of a training process with a guy named Jack Lynn, who we've talked about before. I know many of you have heard preach here and things like that. And what Jack's going to do is really do a pretty extensive training with that search team about how they'll navigate this process and what their role will be and what communication with the church will look like, all those kinds of things. And so what I want to say to you is two things. Number one, the ball's moving, okay? There's traction. I definitely want you to know that, like there's a process in motion. Number two, and I think number two is more important than number one, but number two is it's been already an incredibly prayerful process. An incredibly prayerful process. And I hope you hear that. It's pray, wait, listen, pray, wait, listen, pray, wait, let move, okay? And everybody involved already been part of that. And that probably needs to be the most encouraging thing to us at this point. And I want to just encourage you to be praying. Just praying for yourself and this part of the process, praying for Journey, praying for that search team. And just as that continues to solidify the last little bits there, just continue to pray for that team. And we'll try, again, to give updates as consistently as possible with the appropriate information, all those kind of things. But I hope right today, I just want you to be encouraged. It's a prayerful process already. It's a prayerful listening process already. And so I'm grateful for that, and I hope you are as well. So I want to give you a little bit of update on that, kind of just allow us all to be on the same page early with that. We all good? Okay, good. All right, here we go. So I want to start this final installment of this series of messages we've been in called Watch Out. I want to start it maybe a little differently than I would normally start a message. Not that I never have, but just a little bit different. And what I want to do is I want to just somewhat briefly walk through a series of passages, or really parts of passages from the scriptures, and then just like pull a thread through them as they set the platform for us for the rest of what we'll have a conversation about today. And maybe I could start in Matthew chapter 16, where we get this really unique conversation. It's Jesus starting to tell his disciples, I'm going to be crucified. And in that moment, Peter, like the most vocal of the followers, says, oh, no, that's not happening. I'm not letting that happen. Jesus, like, I'm going to have a really like public death. It's going to be a criminal's death. So it's going to be agonizing and brutal, and that's what I'm going to do. And Peter's like, nope. And Jesus says back to Peter, yo, Peter, get behind me, Satan. Now, I don't know where you fall in terms of a rebuke, but that feels strong. That feels strong. Peter, this guy that we've been with, traveling with, watching, like Jesus looks at him and says, get behind me, Satan. I'm pretty sure that's not even code. I think it's just like upfront and honest. It's like Jesus being real clear, hey, Peter, we're not playing here. I'm not going to leave any room for like question or like confusion. Like this is going to happen. And he says, get behind me, because here's the challenge, Peter. Like the reason I want you to get behind me is because you don't really have in mind, you don't really have in sight things of my kingdom. The reason you don't want to let me be crucified is because you're only thinking about merely earthly concerns. You're only thinking about merely earthly, temporary concerns. You're only thinking about the power you want me to acquire, the economy you want to live in, the right you want to have as a person who would follow myth. That's all you're really concerned about. It's just merely temporary, earthly things. That passage expands a little bit. Jesus then pulls in the rest of the disciples who are with them to expand the conversation in verse 24 and 25. And he looks at them and he says, hey, if you really want to be my disciple, which just simply means if you really want your life to look like my life, if you want your life to sound like, act like, see like, feel like, live like my life, if you really want to be like me, then what I'm going to ask you to do is to deny yourself, deny your own preferences, deny your own selfish dreams and desires, to deny good things that are short of the best things. I'm going to ask you to deny all of that and pick up your cross, pick up your symbol of dying to yourself, pick up your symbol of dying with me, letting me experience your death. Like, I want you to pick up your cross and then follow me. Because if you try too hard to hold on to this life, you're going to lose everything. But if you'll let go of this life, you could gain everything. Jesus inviting them into this reality of, hey, look, Peter does, and you do too, have in mind like merely earthly things. But I want to invite you to think about life in a much bigger way. A much bigger way. So you got to deny yourself. A little later, in John chapter 18, Jesus just in one line says this statement. He says, my kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom, my way of operating, my way of decision making, my way of impact, my way of influence, my way of dreaming, my thinking of the future, my engagement in this society, it's not actually of this world. I am about something very different. So much better, but very different. These are big statements from Jesus. A guy named Paul, who wrote a lot of the New Testament, just a really devoted follower of Jesus, he carries the theme a little bit. Galatians chapter 2, which we've been in the letter of Galatians the last couple weeks, but Galatians chapter 2, Paul makes this really radical statement. He's like, hey, I've been crucified with Jesus. Like that death that Jesus experienced on a cross, like my life has experienced that. I have actually died to myself. I don't actually live anymore. But the life that I live in this world, it's actually like Jesus living through me. This life I live in this world, well, I live for Jesus, the one who loved me and gave himself for me. Man, if you really wanted to simplify life with Jesus into like one line, that might be it. I I just live for Jesus because he was the one who loved me and gave himself for me. Are you kidding me? That's pretty good. It's pretty good. But it started with, like, I've been crucified. Like, I'm all the time dying to my own desires, my desires that might be contrary to Jesus. I'm all the time dying to myself so I could be his disciple. I could be more and more in his image the way he actually created me to be. Paul, a little bit different tone, a little bit different vocabulary, says in Colossians chapter 3, another letter to another group of people trying to follow Jesus. He says, hey, I want to encourage you, set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. Set your mind on the way the kingdom of Jesus is working. Set your mind on the way Jesus engages and the way Jesus leads and the way Jesus governs his kingdom. Set your mind on the way Jesus thinks about authority, has authority, shares authority. Think about the kingdom. Like, set your mind on things above in the way that Jesus' name really is above every other name. Not on all this earthly stuff. Like all the earthly things that you have to do, engage them, but do them with your mind set on things above so that above could influence. Now, that's interesting to me because I think, especially if you've been around church any amount of time, you're probably at least somewhat familiar with those phrases. Maybe familiar enough that they actually strike you, or you first hear them as slightly neutral, common, familiar. And yet, if we're honest with ourselves, those are really radical statements. Those are not normal statements. I mean, really, those are not like your run-of-the-mill, average, everyday statement. In fact, they could almost feel surreal if you stopped to think about it enough. Really? You want me to die to myself? You want me to live in the sacrifice? Wait, Jesus, wait. You're the king, and you're gonna die. And again, maybe sometimes that idea gets a little diluted to us 2,000 years later because we're really familiar with it. But I'm like, what? What? Doesn't it feel a little bit like Jesus is thinking about life differently than we might be? It could be. I mean, it could only be me. But doesn't it feel a little bit like Jesus is seeing life, like just through a lens that we're not seeing it through? It's amazing to me. It's amazing to me. Let's just play it out for a second. We could maybe see it a little bit, and maybe it'll help you. I feel your tension building a little bit, so we'll do it with a little bit of levity. Okay, but what if Jesus is actually seeing life through the lens of a cross? What if Jesus is seeing life through the motivation of love, the sacrifice of love? What if Jesus is seeing life through the victory that comes with death and resurrection? What if Jesus is all the time looking through a lens that all the time includes sacrifice? It has on the other end of it victory, but it includes sacrifice. What if it's impossible for Jesus to see a conversation, to see a moment, to see an opportunity, to perform a miracle, to come back from the dead, to raise other people from the dead, to heal people? What if it's impossible for Jesus to do that without seeing through the cross? Without seeing through this symbol of his death, his invitation for us to die to ourselves so that we could live with him, and the power of a resurrection post-cross? What if the only way Jesus is looking is through the cross? Well, then that feels like that would be our invitation, right? Feels like that would be our invitation if we're going to be his disciple, if we're going to be like him. But there are some challenges to that because we're not naturally born looking through the cross. That's not our natural tendency, right? There are obstacles. There are other filters, other lenses that we have to fight out from in order to see. So let me just play one out. One is we got to kind of get through like where we live. We tend to read the scriptures. We tend to pray, right? Through an American, Western, developed lens, right? It's just true. It's why it's so easy for us to read the Bible as if it's only to us. When it's over and over again, it's collective. It's we. It's we. It's us. Jesus writing communities of people, building relationship, building nations. Like that's what Jesus is doing. And yet it's easy to look through the lens. And so then when we look through this lens, we see a Jesus, but he's kind of American. And he kind of needs to fit our political system, which has huge risk. Because look, here's the reality. When we see it this way, like Jesus has to fit in how we see life and how we operate in merely earthly things. And like we've got to see it. And here's the challenge. Like if we think about it just in terms of politics, right? Just in terms, like there's no political party. There's no political party that has a fully biblical view about any social issue. Now, I'm concerned you won't take me seriously. So let me say it again. There is no political party that has a fully biblical view of any social issue. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's okay because maybe the Savior isn't going to be found through an American lens. Maybe the Savior is going to be found through a cross-filtered lens. But it's tough. Now, because we live in America, we got one more. Because we live in America, what we're taught is to think about ourselves, right? This is just us. This is my John Allen lens. Okay, right? This is what we do, right? It's like I see life through my desires and my dreams and my ambitions. I see life through my story, through my past, through my wounds, through my successes. Like I see this is it, right? But here's the problem. In a culture that really celebrates individualism and independence, this can become damaging. It can become very limiting. So instead of allowing first the cross to transform how I see this, I let this transform how I see the cross. So right, wrong lens first. Wrong lens first. Does that mean my past doesn't count? Wins, losses, successes, hurts? No, man, they all count. But what view is shaping what view? See, what Jesus is doing is Jesus, he's just keeping cross first. Look through the cross. Oh, man, and then when you see your life, you will actually see your life radically different. If you can see cross first, it starts to make sense why Jesus would say, just deny yourself. Deny yourself. Which isn't forget yourself, which isn't lose track of yourself. It's like, see yourself through my lens first. See yourself through my, man. But listen, you part of the reason Jesus' statements are so radical that we read, get behind me, Satan, I die to myself, pick up your cross, Paul, I lay down my life, I live for the one who loved himself and gave himself for me, set your mind on things above, not on. The reason those are so radical is because that every generation struggles with this. Every culture struggles with this. We could go talk about this in any part of the world, and they have their version of struggle with this. Right? This is just part of the deception. So what lenses, what do we see? What do we want that oftentimes prevents us from seeing life through the lens of a cross? The way Jesus would see it, motivated by love and motivated by a sacrifice that brings change and a death that brings resurrection. Well, I think there's a couple, there's probably 4 or 5, but today I want to just unpack 2 that are like watch out moments for us. They're just like, hey, watch out, because this set of glasses, this desire, it keeps coming back. It keeps coming back. So again, I think there's 4 or 5 really big ones. I want to give you 2 today. Here's the first one. Maybe write this down, grab a picture of or something, because I'm just going to tell you this. These are going to take some processing. These are probably not going to be instantaneous lens changes. And you also need to know that in Jesus' most radical statements, like pick up your cross and follow me, that's a truth-filled statement. It's a direct statement. But like with everything with Jesus, it's also just layered in grace. It's layered in hope. It's coated in hope and belief and desire and love. So we want to hear both that grace and truth, that love and that hope as we navigate these. Here's the first one. It keeps us stuck a little bit. And it's this way of living that says, I am devoted to resisting suffering. I am devoted to resisting suffering at all costs. And some of you quickly be like, John, you don't know my life. It is full of suffering. Should we just compare notes? Right, it is full of suffering. But don't you sometimes find yourself trying to do whatever it takes to resist the suffering, to avoid the suffering, to escape as quickly as possible? Isn't it true that we have this idea that all suffering must be bad, and sometimes we even live with the idea that if I'm suffering, it must be because I've done something wrong, or God is mad at me, or God won't bless me. And so at all cost, I will resist suffering. And we even get caught up a little bit in this idea that God's God of comfort. The Bible describes him as comfort. It's true. It's true. It does. The scripture describes God as the God of all the comfort. But sometimes we slightly misread that and translate it a little bit as that God is the God of comfortable. God's the God of making me comfortable. And there's a difference. There's a difference. God is the God of all comfort because God knows suffering is part of life. God is the God of comfort because he knows that the sinfulness of the world, including our sin, has brought pain and loss and agony and disruption, and chaos. So he is the God of comfort. He's the God of comfort in bad, unnecessary suffering. He is the God of comfort in necessary suffering, shaping suffering. He's the God of comfort. And just maybe instead of the push away from all suffering, maybe the cross-shaped lens, maybe the cross-filtered lens says, no, wait a second. What if there's good in this suffering that's coming my way? What if God really could redeem everything? What if I could approach differently suffering? Now, maybe none of us are going to go out and sign up to hunt it down and find it. We're probably not going to go out and start taking a poll. Hey, could everybody share their suffering with me? I want more of yours. But what if the lens was just a little different? Jesus did it. I mean, that's what Jesus did. It's part of why Jesus can ask us into it, right? Look what Jesus did. Luke chapter 9, when Jesus is approaching Jerusalem, he says, the scriptures say, he picked up his courage. He gathered all his courage, and he steeled himself. And he's really fulfilling a prophecy that was in the book of Isaiah way back in the Old Testament that said he set his face like flint. He just set his face like flint, he gathered all his courage, and he walked into Jerusalem. Now, why is that a big deal? Because that's the week he knows he's heading towards his crucifixion. And I love that that the scripture's honest, that Jesus, heading towards his own crucifixion, had to gather up all the courage he could muster. All of it. That he had to steel himself internally to say, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go do this. And you and I have benefited from that, by the way. You know, you and I benefited from that. We're still benefiting from that. If you're not benefiting from that, you can. I mean, Jesus is available today, like his death was, so he could be with us. But is it possible that we are resisting, we're resisting suffering because we have elevated comfort and we have said, well, when we are perfectly comfortable, that could be the only sign of God's blessing. We happen to live in a culture that wants you to be comfortable, wants me to be comfortable, tells us all the time what we should have. I'm always amazed at how much culture tells me what I should have. It's fascinating to me. I still never forget when Eric and I lived in our apartment when we were first married, and we would drive by this bank all the time. And I'll just never forget the sign forever was up on this bank. You deserve a new house. I always wondered how they knew that. Right? That vocab is everywhere. Right? Hey friends, you and I, we don't deserve anything. We get Jesus. And if his name is really above every name, then his name it's above suffering. It can redeem suffering. It can use suffering. It can take a tool like a cross and somehow make it a win. That's why Jesus makes these radical statements. Let me give you one more. One more lens that we just kind of got to fight through. This is, again, kind of through our American lens and through our self lens, right? Through my John Allen lens. And that is I'm devoted more to my God than to God. I'm devoted more to my God than to God. And you can kind of see, right? Small g, big G, like go with me here. I'm devoted more to my God. Because we have access to everything. And because we love the comfortable, and because sometimes we resist suffering, and because sometimes we think that everything is solved by a position of power, it's really easy to just love the God we create more than the God who created us. To love the God we create more than the God who is still creating. I think about it this way a little bit. Isaiah 64:8, there's this passage where God is described as the potter, and you and I are described as the clay on the pottery wheel, right? And yet how often do we kind of flip that around? And if we kind of wrote the scriptures or we wrote how we lived it, it would be, hey, God, I am the potter and you are the clay. God, I'm going to I think you said that, but I'm going to I'm going to peel that off the pottery here a little bit. I don't really like that you said that. Or God, I kind of like a God that's like this. And so God, I'm going to remake you just a little bit. I'm going to change the handle of this cup we're molding. Like we flip it just a little bit, right? It becomes like, what's our desire? What's our desire? And again, why is that? It's because we're often told, we often live like what we deserve or what we want matters most. And look, there's no judgment or condemnation in this. You and I all do it. It's part of being born of the sin nature, right? Nobody's immune to it, right? If you're literally sitting here today saying, I've never done that, you're doing it right now. Okay, let me help you, right? Because we've all done it, and we fabricate a God that makes us comfortable. And we miss who God really is. I love this statement. It's really a paragraph from a guy named J.D. Greear. Let me just read this to you. We'll pop it on the screen for you as well. But J.D. Greear, a pastor, writer, really prolific writer, great thinker, he said this: those of us who have grown up in a consumeristic Western culture envision an Americanized Jesus who is, I love this, 1 part genie, 1 part fan club, 1 part financial advisor, 1 part American patriot, and several parts therapist. It's true, isn't it? Like God's this, I need him to be this over here. I want this. Our God that we make actually makes us more narcissistic and materialistic, not less. And then Greer finishes quoting Voltaire's words, God created man in his own image, and man has been trying to return the favor ever since. Ouch. Ouch. Guilty as charged. Guilty as charged. Right? Which is why we got to watch out. Let me build something for us. Just come with me for a second. God created you. God created you uniquely, with passion, with love. Out of the overflow of his love, God created you. And he created you for a couple of reasons. One is to be with him and to be like him. If you were created to be like him, then you were created to be creative. And so what is one of Satan's greatest ploys? Is to get you, a person who is created to be creative, to try and recreate the God who made you. Right? Let's just flip that. God, we have this desire to create. So why not recreate the God who made us? Why not try and change the plays? Hey, friends, we got to watch out for this. We got to watch out for this. Individually, we got to watch out for it as a church. Churches do it all the time. Collections of people. It's not just individual. Collections of people. It's just easy, right? That's why we got to constantly keep coming back to these things. Like, watch out, which lens am I looking through? My lens or cross-shaped lens? My lens or cross-shaped lens? One of the things that I will miss significantly about my role here is this role keeps me dying to myself like nobody's business. Like, you might all think, well, everything we do, John likes it. Surely you kid, right? No, but right, because when we're like part of the power of communities, it keeps us dying to ourselves. Part of the power of togetherness is it keeps us dying. Part of the power of a greater mission than just us is it keeps us dying to ourselves, right? So we also means we collectively have to be careful. Which lens are we wearing? If we all get the American lens on or we all get the self lens on at the same time, we're in trouble. Right? We're in trouble. We want to help each other with it. We want to walk with each other. We want to be truly iron that sharpens iron, the way the writer of Proverbs described these relationships. So maybe here's the question. I'll give you some examples. And again, Jesus is like trying to invite us into something here, always, right? Jesus always sees, always seeing, always living, motivated by love. Motivated by a sacrificial, giving, power-giving, transformative love for us. Always. So let me just ask us this question. How do we more fully, how do you more fully, how do I more fully see life through the cross? How do we do it? That's our question, right? How do we do it? It's one thing to talk about it and talk about where we miss it, but how do we actually do it? Well, what I think we're invited into today is three questions that, again, we're not going to in a moment. Like we're going to have to let the Lord work with us. We're going to have to let the Spirit guide and shape. But there are these three questions that I want to take just a moment to process a little and to set us up to think about and process about and pray about and journal about, read about, have conversations about with each other in the weeks and in the days ahead. That's like three simple questions. Now, in order for us to capture that a little bit, what I want to do is I want to hand this back to your location so you can process them there in Middleville, just to talk about a little bit, okay, like out of all of this, what It's Jesus inviting us to consider. So I want to hand this back to you. I love you, church. I hand this back to you so you can process there. Now here's the reality. It's 3 questions. All of them are challenging. Okay, every one of them is challenging. Here's the first one, right? Where do I need to use or activate or do what I already know? See, there are things in our hands that we have. There are things that we have just because we're in an environment like this that we already have. Where do I need to do what I already know that I might not be doing because of the lens that I'm seeing it through? One of our lenses often says that in order to do anything, I have to fully understand it first. Right? That's a little bit of an American image-driven, okay, I'm going to do that. We've got an image, right? But what if instead of waiting to understand prayer, we just go for it? We just go for it. What if we just go for it? That's what the disciples were doing when they said to Jesus, come on, teach us to pray. We acknowledge we don't know how to do it. Because we've watched you pray, and it sure doesn't sound like our prayer, and it sure doesn't sound like those Pharisees. Something different's happening when you're praying. And we don't really think it's just in your words. We think it's in your heart and your connection. So teach us how to do that. What if we just need to go for it? Right? What if in a land that does have incredible freedom, where you can have access to every Bible ever created on your phone, and you could buy limitless bound copies of the scriptures without anybody caring or noticing, what if we actually just tried to absorb it? What if we have it and we said, you know what, I don't understand it. I can't understand. What if we just kept going after it? 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 I want to tell you a story about my friend Roberta, who's actually part of our Caledonia location and leads a prison ministry, and sometimes is part of our worship team as well. Years ago, Roberta is part of this music industry, and she finds herself in Japan, but unable to speak the language and unable to do much. So she goes out to do the music thing and finds herself back in her hotel room for hours upon hours, right? Can't watch TV, right? And when she had gone to Japan, somebody had sent her with a Bible. And so she just opens it and starts reading it because it's there. She's there. She's wondering. She's searching. She starts reading it. Not because she had a perfect understanding before she started, not even because she had a perfect plan to understand it while she was reading it. And if you ever get a chance to meet and talk to Roberta, you got to ask her to tell the story. Because what you'll find is Roberta, in this still very compelling way, saying, yeah, when I was reading that, that's where I fell in love with Jesus. That's where I fell in love with Jesus. I remember the first time she told me, you're in my office with her and her husband, Mark, and she's telling this story, and you can just hear, the compelling part of the story, and, it was so moving to me. And I've retold the story probably hundreds of times in other places. And why couldn't that happen to you and me? Why couldn't that happen to you and me? It's Jesus' book to us. It's the inspired word of God created like you're created out of his inspiration. Why couldn't that happen to you and me? Why not try? Why not just try? There's a lot of things we have that maybe we're just not using because we're afraid or a little intimidated. I get it. I understand that all the way. What if we just try? Here's the second question. That the first one was hard. Here's the second one. Where am I more selfish than I know? Yep. Where am I more selfish than I know? Yeah. That's kind of what Peter was encountering, right? Peter doesn't want Jesus to go to a cross, in part because Peter wants Jesus to be on a throne. Wait, I don't think dying on a Roman cross is going to overthrow a Roman government. There's part of that. But there's also part of it where if Peter's going to keep following Jesus, he doesn't want to end up on a cross. Now, interestingly, most of the Jesus' inner circle of 12 didn't end up being martyred on crosses or burned at stakes. So Peter had to change somewhere. But in the moment, it's like, wait a minute, where are you more selfish than you know? Now, it's probably common, but here's what we need here. We got to have the courage to ask somebody, where am I more selfish than I know? Where am I more selfish than I know? I'm pretty willing to just be pretty transparent and open with you, but I strategically did not ask my wife that before today. Because I was afraid I was going to have to share it. So that'll be a lunch convo for us. Just being honest, which maybe is a window into where I'm more selfish than I know. Okay? What about you? Would you just ask somebody? No, ask somebody that loves you. Ask somebody that loves you. Ask somebody you trust. Ask somebody you trust. Or do we just have our own lens on? We're just seeing life just through our lens. And it dilutes the cross. Instead of seeing it through the cross and it kind of shaping who we are. Last question. And the most difficult issues of life, who has ultimate authority? Who has ultimate authority over how you respond when you're hurt? Who has ultimate authority over how you handle your successes, your bonuses, your promotions, your wins? Who has ultimate authority over where your kids go to college or what trade they pursue? Who has ultimate authority over what you give? How you view money? Who has ultimate authority over how you view sexuality? How you engage it in our culture? Who has ultimate authority over that bitterness that's still sitting in there? Who has ultimate authority over your marriage or your dating relationship? Is it Jesus? Is it Jesus? Or is it you? Again, there's no shame in that. Sometimes it's me. That's why I got to ask the question. This is why Jesus invites us and models this life of surrendering in an ongoing way. It's constant. And part of what Jesus talks about in a different passage with this reality of pick up your cross and follow me is he says, hey, you need to count the cost. You need to count the cost because it's going to cost you. You're going to answer some of these questions in ways you don't want to if you pick up your cross and follow him. But here's what I want to invite you to do today. Is I want you to consider the cost of not following him, not picking up the cross. What's that cost? See, if I ignore these questions, and I ignore the truth that the Spirit will lovingly bring to light, if I ignore that, what I know is I'm missing out on some of God's goodness. I am missing out on some of his best. I am missing out on some of his expressed power in my life. I am missing out on some of what he has for me, some of what he's inviting me into, some of his kingdom coming to earth that he would love for me to see. There's a cost on both sides. Yeah? So we got to watch out and just say, look, what lens do I have? What lens do I have? Now, those three questions, they can be a little overwhelming. I get it. So for right now, just pick one. Just pick one. I don't even know if there's a right or wrong one. Just pick one. And this afternoon, just begin to process it. Pray it through, ask. Maybe you're not a follower of Jesus yet. Maybe you'd still ask those questions. They're like, what do I really think about this? What do I really think? Like, who do I really want to have authority in my life? Me? Somebody else? Advertisers, voices, media voices, pocket. Who do I really want to have ultimate authority in my life? It's tricky. Got to watch out to take note which lens we really have on.